Hey, Gringo 2008. I do not know why, but my webcam is now working on my computer. So I wanted to make a response to you about your aesthetics video. Now, to preface this, I don't completely buy the aesthetic principle, but I buy certain notions of it. For example, I don't like to live very, I don't know, like extravagantly, and I don't have the means to either way. But I don't really like to. I mean, the laptop that I'm using right now, it's probably the most expensive thing I have. It's probably worth about $1,000 or something originally. It's probably now worth about $300, maybe. Um, but it's still probably one of the most expensive things I've ever gotten in my life. And I don't buy that much myself. I don't find much of a need to. Um, and I don't think that, sorry, closing out Facebook so it doesn't distract me. So I don't really think having a lot of property is necessary. I don't think it's that virtuous in of itself. A lot of people like to do the opposite of the aesthetic principle. They like to say, well, I have a lot more property than you, therefore I'm more virtuous than you, or I must be better than you are. And I think that's bullshit. I think lots of people in America do the opposite of the aesthetic principle. I don't know what you'd call it, but they like to say that because they have so much wealth and because they have so much finances and money and stuff, they're better than other people. Now, I think we both agree this is bullshit. And I also think the opposite extreme is bullshit, for the record. I think that thinking just because you've gone through more pain than other people, that doesn't make you necessarily better than other people or more virtuous or more knowledgeable or whatever. You might be, but it's not necessarily the case just because you've gone through more pain. So I wanted to respond to you, and I definitely respect a lot of your arguments, and I hope this conversation will go well. So here we go. I know I promised this, a week or so ago, but I've been having problems with my video, and all of a sudden my camera just randomly works. So there you go. Don't know why that happened. So here we go. So you start off by saying that the aesthetic principle has been ingrained from religion. Now, that's actually not the well. It's not the case that it's particularly religious, or it has to be particularly religious, really. Secular people do it all the time, or not do it all the time, but they can do it, and they have. One good example, Voltaire de Cleyre, an individualist, an anarchist without adjectives in the early 20th century, lived a very ascetic life. She lived very simply, she dressed very simply, she lived very frugally. Now, she was also very poor, so she didn't have much of a choice, but even so, she could have gone into other associations or groups and led a lot more of a successful life. She could have gone to all these extravagant parties that she was invited to and stuff, but she never did. But at the same time, she never said this made her better than other people. She definitely complained about the anarchist movement, like from Emma Goldman, having wild parties and all these dances and extravagant things that she felt were not even adding anything to the movement, really, and were just a waste of time. And that was definitely the aesthetic principle in place. But she wasn't calling herself more virtuous. She just thought that it was a waste of time. I don't think that necessarily means it definitely sounds like she could have been saying that. That could have been an underlying premise. Look, I'm more virtuous because I'm not going into all these dances. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think that over because, I guess you could argue that the underlying premise is that she's saying she's more virtuous, but I don't think Voltaire ever flaunted her her lifestyle or ever came up to somebody and said this makes me better than you or like that. She was a very humble person, and I think the reason why she talked about such things with Emma Goldman or about Emma Goldman is that she felt like they were a detriment to the movement, not necessarily because she was such a big thing to the movement. Like she was adding so much to the movement, and Emma Goldman was adding nothing by going to these parties. But that was more of a factual observation than look, I'm better than you. But anyway, enough of that. Sorry about to get sidetracked. So you say asceticism is living way below your means. Now, I think that's actually a certain application of ascetics, but that's not always how ascetics work out. Broadly speaking, it's just about not seeking as much pleasure as you can actually have. Now, I could probably obtain a lot more pleasure right now if I really wanted to, but I don't really want to. I'm quite fine where I am. I don't feel like I need any more stuff. And you might do this for a few reasons. You might do it because you think the pleasures in question are a waste of time, they distract from more important things, or that they're actually harmful, or possibly something else. So those are three possible reasons why people accept the ascetic principle from one place or another. Now, for me with property, I think that it's a distraction from important things like human social relations, improving yourself, focusing your money on helping, improve your own self and people you care about. I think that's much more important than having a lot of wealth or having a lot of property. And I think non-material wealth and stuff like that is way more important anyway. Like, I'm not a spiritual kind of guy, but I do have some sort of inclination towards believing, there's an essence of person. I wouldn't call it a human nature because I don't really buy the concept of human nature. It's a whole other discussion, but I'm kind of skeptical of human nature at the very least. But I think there's this sort of essence that makes us up, oh, that Nick, he's doing X again. That's so like him. When people say stuff like that, I think they're really talking about the soul of people or how, who they really are. So like Oscar Wilde said, the soul of man under socialism, but he wasn't talking about a Christian notion of the soul. He was talking about, well, the essence of man, or how people would normally interact under socialism. What would that look like? So anyway, I think there's a secular notion of the soul that people should, and Voltaire talked about this too. I'm a big fan of her, so I might mention her off and on. Anyway, so you say the more pain a person goes through, the more virtuous they are. Now, here we have an agreement. I totally agree this is bullshit. But I don't necessarily buy the idea that this is all there is to the principle of asceticism. People who live in an ascetic manner don't necessarily think they're better than other people just because they've done this. They might, or they might actually be better. They might think this, or they might actually be better. But since pain tends to teach people lessons one way or another, as long as they live to tell about it afterwards. But that's not necessarily just because of the way they live their lives. Either way, though, living with more pain or pleasure gives you different senses of life, what it's about, and how best to live it. Some people don't mind having some pain, but they may not even think about it like that. They might just think about it as how life must be for them. And I doubt such people would be, holier than thou. Now, I could be wrong, but I don't think I am, at least from my limited experience of looking this up. I mean, I totally am going to admit offhand that this is a non-philosophical defense, mostly non-philosophical defense, or non-rigorous defense of asceticism, because I'm kind of new to the principle, and I only really picked it up from Voltaire and sort of inclinations that I personally had for a lot of my life. So this isn't going to be like a big rigorous defense of it, and I don't think it's like, the best principle in the world or anything. I think people can certainly take it in bad directions like any other principle. But I definitely do think it's worth more than you're giving it credit for. So yeah, I could be wrong about all that, but I don't think I am. The Wikipedia page on asceticism actually even talks about this. It says, quote, "Those who practice ascetic lifestyles do not consider their practices virtuous in themselves, but pursue such a lifestyle to encourage or quote, prepare the ground for mind-body transformation." Now, I'm secular and you're secular as well. We're both atheists, I'm pretty sure. At least I know I'm an atheist. So we don't really believe in mind-body transformation in a religious sense, but in a, physical sense or mental sense or whatever, or emotional sense, we can certainly see it has some credence. But what doesn't have credence, I think, is your view of ascetics and how they push this in other people's faces. So you say, the person who has the ascetic principle would automatically think that they're more virtuous if they work a lot more than, it's the worker example you give. One guy works a lot and gets the same amount of money as someone who doesn't work at all. But the ascetic principle would be like, well, no, the guy who's working a lot is is actually doing better for himself because he's working so hard. But for you, that you say that's irrational. But first off, before we even get to the irrationality, I'm not so sure that's what we must say if we embrace some sort of ascetic principle. It could be a possible answer, but you act as if people who embrace the principle must blindly follow pain and never weigh the benefits and losses. I don't think it's actually correct to think that people who like the ascetic principle would actually say something like this. Clearly, if you can make the same amount of money than not working at all, then the ascetic principle to follow here would be to do whichever helps you live more simply. Now, which do you think is more simple? Not working, getting the same amount of money, or working your ass off and getting the same amount of money? Now you talk about this being irrational, or the worker being irrational for working so hard. But they're only acting irrationally because you, for whatever reason, closed off the possibility that the worker could be getting some non-material benefits from it. Perhaps they're going to get an apprenticeship. Perhaps they're learning a lot of things that they can apply to their own self-improvement or to a nearby community's improvement. Or perhaps they're learning valuable skills that they derive inherent pleasure from. I don't know why you close off these non-material benefits, but I think non-material benefits are really important. I think material benefits are important too, but I think they're both important, is what I'm really trying to say. But yeah, otherwise, if there is no other non-material benefit, we both agree he's acting rationally, but I don't think the ascetic would claim otherwise. Now you keep saying that's the ascetic principle, but I don't think I don't think the words actually mean what you think they mean. So next you say, the point in life is to have as much pleasure as possible. Now I'm going to throw some Nietzsche your way. I'm going to go all Nietzschean on you. This is a quote out of Beyond Good and Evil from Chapter 7, which is entitled Our Virtues. Quote, you want, if possible, and he's talking about the hedonists, the utilitarians, the pleasure-driven people, and there is not a more foolish, quote, if possible, to do away with suffering. And we as in the free spirits that Nietzsche wants to see in philosophy and life, it really seems that we would rather have it increased and made worse than it has ever been. Well-being, as you understand it, is certainly not a goal. It seems to us an end, a condition which one renders man ludicrous and contemptible, and makes his destruction desirable. The discipline of suffering, of great suffering, know ye not that it is not only this discipline that has produced all the elevations of humanity hitherto? The tension of soul and misfortune which communicates to it its energy, its shuddering in view of wreck and ruin, its incentiveness and bravery in undergoing, enduring, interpreting, and exploiting misfortune, and whatever death, mystery, disguise, spirit, artifice, or greatness has been bestowed upon the soul. Has it not been bestowed through suffering? Through the discipline of great suffering. And man, creature and creator, are united. In man there is only matter. There is not only matter, shred, excess, clay, mire, folly, chaos, but there is also the creator, the sculptor, the hardness of the hammer, the divinity of the spectator. And the seventh day, do ye understand this contrast? And that your sympathy for the creature in man applies to that which has to be fashioned, bruised, forged, stretched, roasted, annealed, refined, to that which must necessarily suffer and is meant to suffer. In our sympathy, do ye not understand what our reverse sympathy applies to when it resists your sympathy at the worst of all pampering and enervation? So it is great sympathy against sympathy. But to repeat it once more, there are higher problems than the problems of pleasure and pain and sympathy, and all systems of philosophy which only deal with these are naiveties. Now, I don't necessarily completely agree with Nietzsche, but I think if you're only focusing on maximizing pleasure for an end, and you ignore the many pains of life that actually help people get to where they are, and I agree there are different levels of pleasure, by the way, and how you distinctify video game pleasure and philosophy pleasure. Now, you talk about pleasure and happiness. Now, I don't know we should actually use the same thing. Use it as the same thing. For example, when I gain pleasure, am I necessarily happy? Or more importantly, are the people around me happy? Are they happy because I'm getting pleasure for something, or are they instead disgusted with what I do, or something else? The typical example of rape applies here. If I may derive pleasure and happiness from raping someone, but that doesn't mean it should be strived towards or striven towards. You may say, of course, that this is a more base pleasure than having consensual sex, but how do you know? Where do you get the knowledge to state such an opinion? It could be one of the best pleasures I ever get, and I may have even tried consensual sex and thought it's not as pleasurable. Shouldn't I then, under this rule of following pleasure, seek more rape victims for myself? Now, my point isn't to dissuade people to become utilitarians because they secretly are or support rape or whatever in the right context, but just to make people think about these principles and how badly they can easily be applied. Now, I don't get the concept of sinning either, so I won't say much about that, but I'm not sure ascetics have to be moralistic. I've talked to a Christian, and he really talks about how it really just helps him focus, and it just helps him have more focus in life. You talk about this person that does a lot of self-destructive things, but they really just sound self-destructive, not following the ascetic principle at all about living simply. It's certainly not resulting in them living simply. You want people to seek cultivation, but cultivation, you have to have pain to cultivate yourself. So I'm not so sure that we can really cultivate ourselves without pain and just narrowly focusing on pleasure. Now, I don't really want to purge the weaknesses, and I'm not too interested in that. They help me learn, suffer, and actually get pleasure from knowing I'm a human being and that I can improve. So anyway, I don't have much more time. I should have recorded this on a different device, but I didn't expect this would record here. So this is my response to you. Hope you liked it. Any questions, leave them in the comments. Video responses are welcome.